we're recording now. So, yeah, we're going to do spirit guides. Now, I suppose you've all heard about spirit guides at some point or other.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a concept that's been around for quite a long time, really, when you think about it. I mean, spiritualism has really brought it to the fore as the idea that we have some form of guiding spirit. But if you look back through the history of, all spiritual thought, there's always been this, right? I mean, some of the most, like the first angelic creatures, for example, were shown in the Sumerian wall carvings, where they have, they got these beings with wings. Beings kind of sort of like a transcendent image. Wings, I think, being symbolic, are not meant to be literal, unless we go down the spaceman route and start talking about Von Däniken.
The angels I saw had wings.
Yeah. So goes right back, doesn't it? Goes right the way back, Jonathan and others. You know quite a lot about the ancient history, I think, Jonathan, don't you, as well? So it goes right back, this idea that we have some form of guiding spirit. But when one develops mediumship, one takes a bit more interest in this, because you want to start to get a bit more help and guidance. So when I first got interested in spiritualism, all of this was completely, totally new to me. I'd had a lot of experience with meditation. I'd been very interested in lots of techniques to develop one's awareness. So I started yoga when I was about 14, I remember, or younger. It might have even been 12, I remember, because I remember saying to the PE school teacher when I first joined big school, as a junior school, that I wanted to do yoga, and he got really cross with me because he said, "Don't be stupid, don't go to this silly, daft sort of thing, it won't get you fit." Yeah. So I got interested in it very early. So I got very interested in the idea of the spiritual side of ourselves. But when I joined spiritualism, or got involved in it, the whole idea of spirit guides was really quite new to me, really. You see, I kind of jumped in at the deep end because I met the medium Doris Stokes. A lot of you might still remember Doris Stokes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I met her before she was famous. And I went along to see her with my sister, first of all, because my sister had lost her husband. And she started giving messages from the spirit side, and it just blew me away because I'd never heard of anything like this before. It was just remarkable evidence she was telling me. It's a long story, but I'll have to bridge that, really. But basically at that time, it was before I met Jane, but I'd been married once before. I had a baby that I was bringing up on my own, just months old, and the conflicts in the marriage in that first one. The baby had been taken off grabbed from the nanny, and the welfare were trying to find it again. And Doris Stokes told me where to look, and she was telling me incredible things that all worked out to be absolutely true, including predicting the day I would meet my wife Jane. So this was my first experience of the whole idea of spiritualism. And she said to me, "You're going to become a medium. It's the whole thing in your life is going to be medium." And I'd only just first heard about this, and she said it's going to happen very, very rapidly for you and very, very fast. And she was telling me that she was getting some of this from her guide, who I think her guide was called Ramtha, I think, or something like that, had an unusual name. She said some of it came from a guide, but she also gave me things, told me about all the names of my family, people. She was absolutely remarkable, but very, very good with the names. Incredible. Well, it all came true. And it was quite soon after meeting Doris Stokes, it must have been about 6 months, that my auntie, who was also interested in these things, told me about a medium called Peter Close. That she said, he's just retired, and why don't you go and see him too, and see if you're getting interested in this? Because, I couldn't stop talking about it. So I went to see Peter Close, who was another medium in London. He was the brother of Brian Close, the famous cricketer. And he said to me, "You're the person that's meant to be in my circle," after he gave me a mind-boggling reading. Actually, incredible it was. I think when you first go on the path, you get really, really powerful evidence that is completely convinced you beyond any doubt. You know, I mean, I was told things that were just absolutely extraordinary. But anyway, so what happened is I joined his circle. And so the long story short, this is how I started to get interested. And I sat in his circle for development of mediumship, because he told me he'd been told that he's waiting for me. He wasn't going to do the circle until I joined the circle. And I therefore joined his circle, and we would speak to his guide, who was in when he was in trance. So it was some of the times it was full trance mediumship, and we would get instructions from the spirit world. And also I was taught and learned how to connect with my own spirit guides. So if you want to connect with your spirit guides, one of the best ways is if you ever were able to join a spiritualist circle. So I don't know if any of you sat in circle before. Oh, you have, Millie, and you have, Graham. Yeah, fantastic. And Laura too. And were they kind of spiritualist-based circles, were they? Yeah?
Yeah, I joined from the spiritualist church that I went to in my local town.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, that's good. So you know a little bit as well about the...
I do, but obviously it's all stopped with COVID. So
Yeah.
I've been to a spiritualist church for healing on my knee. That, you know, there were two mediums there doing the healing, and they could both see my husband. You know, the one said, "Oh, I saw him as soon as you walked in the door."
Oh, that's nice. Did they give you proof as well? Told you anything?
Oh, yes, yeah. They said they weren't supposed to give me a reading because I'd come for healing.
That's right. You're not supposed to.
They could see that I really needed it. It was only a couple of months after he'd died, you see, and I was still, you know, it was still very, very raw, and they knew that I needed the reading. So,
we don't mix mediumship and healing. We don't do them at the same time.
Well, they weren't supposed to, but you know, they just felt it was, you know, that was part of the healing, perhaps.
It was. It would have been more important to you than the healing.
Yes.
Mentioning it now, isn't it? You know, it would have been part of the healing process. In fact, I think a large part of what we do as mediums is healing. The mediumistic side is healing, isn't it? I mean, you're helping people to come to terms with loss. You know, mediumship's not about predictions, and it's not about guidance about the basic simple things of life. It's much more about proof of life after death, you know, and that's where the guide stuff comes in. I mean, the whole remit of being a medium also, I think, can also go on to the level of developing of our higher consciousness. That's also what I consider as perhaps even higher than mediumship, and I think where sometimes spiritualism falls down a bit, because it doesn't take people on the journey to higher consciousness, although for some it does, and obviously many of the mediums that have been very awake people. So the two things are there, but within spiritualism, of course, we get this idea of the spirit guides, and they can be quite so my reaction, so when I joined the circle, like I was saying, you know, my reaction was, you know, well, how can we prove that this isn't your imagination? You know, I mean, when the guide would come through, and it wasn't every week we'd have the guide, every now and again he'd go into trance and the guide would start behaving. And I tended to argue with the guide rather than speak with the guide. You know, I was not really very good for the circle in that respect, because I would always insist on getting proof, you know, because I say, you know, it's all very well we're listening to a guide here, but I do insist that there is evidence given, the proof that you can prove that you are who you are and not part of the imagination. Because I'd also not studied at the university or anything, but I had learned a lot about psychology. You know, I'm particularly interested in Carl Jung. So it's kind of on the edge psychology, really. Modern psychologists would dismiss him, I expect, nowadays. But he was he worked with Freud and developed his ideas of kind of a mystical psychology, if you've not come across him. But I think we mentioned him before here, haven't we?
Thousands of books. I gave them all away.
You didn't get on with him?
No, I gave them all away to the servants of the light.
Okay, yeah. Well, he's a pretty amazing guy. But he had if you remember in his autobiography, he talked about having a spirit guide, as it were. He wouldn't have called it a guide. He would call it an archetype of some sort.
Animus.
Yeah, an animus. Yeah, perhaps he would have called it the animus. But he had this figure called Philemon that appeared in his dreams and in his experience. And this spiritualists would say is a spirit guide. You know, I mean, Jung didn't have much to do with spiritualism, actually. He kind of poo-pooed it up to a point. That's another issue. But so the question was, could we form some form of mental image that could be mistaken for a guide? So that was my first resistance to it. And also I'd read a lot of the books from Tibet. And there's some amazing stories by, what was her name now?
Alice Bailey.
No, not Alice Bailey. I'm thinking in terms of the tulpas and things like this. What was her name? Oh, I've forgotten her bloody name offhand. I've got the book up there somewhere. Anyway, this lady went to Tibet and lived with the Tibetan monks. And one of the things they taught her to do was to create what they called a tulpa, which is like you'd meditate upon creating a figure, and that figure would then manifest and become a real person. And this idea of the tulpas also fascinated me, that you could use mental energy to create a real being, right? And also you'll find this sort of stuff in magic as well, and when you start to look into it, isn't it?
That's called thought forms.
Yeah, or the golem, isn't there, as well?
Golem, that's right.
You know, and things like that. So I thought, well, could we not also be creating somehow some form of false image of some sort? You know, could we not be creating something that's mental energy? You know, and this tulpa in the stories got out of control, and they had to, in the end, use a meditation to get rid of him in the end and disperse his energy. He became a helpful servant, but kind of took a mind of his own. So all these things were in my thoughts about guides, and I think it's important to think like this a bit, you know, because I think we have to get the proof, you see. So my thoughts are that we can perhaps create a mental image as well. For example, there was another group, I think it was a Canadian group, I'm a bit scanty on the facts here, but there was a Canadian group that decided to sit down and artificially create a spirit, right? And they called that spirit Philip. Right, and they gave him a whole history, you know, and they thought they'd make a nice romantic history to it, that he had he'd fallen in love, and he eventually threw himself off the battlements because of his despair at losing his loved one, right? And they made a whole complete story and sat and meditated upon this spirit. Eventually, Philip started to take a form of his own, because what started to happen is Philip started to talk through Ouija boards for other people, and through table tilting as well. And the table started, you know, when they do the table tilting, the table would dance around. Sometimes you take all your hands off and the table would just dance around the room on itself. But it was typing out messages from Philip, right? So this was obviously either it was an artificial spirit that they created that had a mind of its own, a little bit like this idea of the Tibetan tulpas, or spirits had taken over and jumped in and were using their energy to make the table dance around. So again, question marks, can our mental powers create what people think are guides, right? So these were the questions that were on my mind when I joined the circle. So I kind of took a standpoint of always wanting proof. And incredibly, many of the times that the Peter's guide, Rama, spoke, he would give me proof from the spirit world of people I knew in the spirit world before starting his discourse, right? And they were things that I could accept and knew to be true. I also asked him about things like Nostradamus and what would happen for the future of the world and things like that. And many of those things also came true, because he talked about 2 wars in Iraq and Iran, you know, and he was bang on with that, this was talking back 20 years before that happened, you know. So it was kind of proven to me. And this is why when I say we think about the spirit guides, I think it's always really important that if people start saying, I have a message from a spirit guide, that message must also include proof. You see, so distinguish it between what could be something real and what could be something in people's imagination. Now, the reason I start off with this is because so many people that I've met, both within spiritualism in the days before all this was popular, and even more so now, where everybody seems to want to be mediums and psychics who have even come across spiritualism, for example, how we have out there such a vast amount of fantasy surrounding this topic of spirit guides. So when we connect with our own guides, if we want to find the guides, obviously I think it's good to have a little bit of this skepticism about the guides and to question what's coming into our mind and ask them to prove themselves to us. And they will do that. And they will do it if a person is a genuine medium and they're sat in a circle and the guide is in trance, say the medium is in trance, for example. They will be able to give you evidence and proof. And that's why, you know, I get disliked by a lot of the trance mediums because they say, well, it's no good doing trance unless you're given evidence with it. Because if you're just talking philosophy, that could be just something coming from your imagination. It could be just something coming from, albeit interesting stuff, but the source is probably more from intuition than it is from spirit communication, you know? And I think if we do that, I think it's important, you know, just as a starting point to think that, you know, I know there's guides, you know, it's been proven to me that there's spirit guides. But I think when each of us go on the path to find out who our guides are, I think it's very, very important that we also have that discerning, questioning, slightly skeptical attitude. Now, do you think I'm a bit hard with that?
Not really, no. No, you have to question, don't you? I think you have to, otherwise it could all be in your imagination.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
What I've done in the past is I would use third parties. So I would use a medium. Basically, I would confirm my intuition third party.
That is a good technique, Jonathan. Yeah. Like, so if you've got something in your mind and you think, I've got a spirit guide that's like this, and then you go and see a medium, and that medium, or maybe another maybe more than one, start to give you some confirmation, then it can kind of prove it to you, can't it? Yeah. That's how I went about it as well. And sometimes another thing we did in our circle is I knew there was another circle sitting in another town in Andover, and we were sitting in Eastleigh, and we were sitting on the same nights, and I would ask the spirit guide to give a message to the other circle that was sitting at the same night, and they would ask for a message to come through me on the same night. And then if we compared notes, we found that we were getting messages that were, you know, we were picking up each other's, we were getting a telephone conversation between two circles sitting in two separate places. So again, that gave us proof that these guides were the real deal, that they weren't just coming from our imagination. I mean, it could be argued that we developed some mental image that we were projecting between each other. But, you know, I certainly gave me much more recognition that this is the real thing, you know. And I think it's the same with spirit messages too, because, you know, people can say to me when I do mediumship, well, how come I don't know that you're not reading my mind? You know, because I mean, I might just be very high level of telepathy, and telepathy exists. I mean, I developed telepathy years ago before I started doing it, because I used to be able to tell people what was on their mind and be able to finish their sentences for them and all the rest, even when I was a child. But mediumship, I have to ask myself, you know, how do I know that this isn't just telepathy, just an advanced form of telepathy, that I'm picking up what the person wishes me to say to them, you know? And again, you find there's ways to test it. And a bit like Jonathan said, you used a third party, but it's often happened in the course of my mediumship. One that I've quoted quite a lot because it was so dramatic and it happens loads of times, different things that you get the proof, is if you can tell the person something that couldn't possibly be in their mind, right? So they can only find out later. And the most dramatic one I had with this one was I was given a reading. I used to do what was called, I used to call party plans. So I used to do groups of people around their home, right? When I was first starting out, and I'd go around, I was doing this reading for one woman in this group. So she was away from home. And I said, in your garage, there's a big tin of green paint. And she goes, oh, yes, there is. And it's just fallen over. And she said, not as far as I know. Well, then she went home and she rang me when she got home in hysterics because the green paint, as a tin of green paint had fallen, and it was green as well, had fallen off the shelf and it hit the floor and was all over the place, right? Now, I couldn't think of anything more dramatic because she had no idea that that had happened. So either I had had an extraordinary form of clairvoyance in that I'd seen what was going on in her garage and was able to relate that to her. So that could be, you know, seeing of some sort, remote viewing of some sort, or what the spirit person was telling me. And they have this idea called Occam's razor, which that is really, it's most likely that the simplest answer is going to be the right one. Actually, when you think about it. And the simplest answer was yes. It wasn't some strange form of Heath Robin's sort of clairvoyance. It was, in fact, the spirit world talking to us. And again, it's the same thing. This idea of getting proof in your life of how that these things are an absolute reality, you know. And when you do get that, of course, it is extraordinary, you know, because you know you don't need faith or belief or anything like that. You have truth. You know, you found it. You know it to be true. And what any skeptic might say to you, you know that it doesn't make a ha'porth of difference because you've had these personal experiences that are unshakable. Because you know, and I've only described a few, but through the course of one's life as a medium, or as a spiritualist, or somebody investigating this, or just being interested in the topic, you know, you'll come across situations where you think there's no possible way that can't be the truth, you know, that's not the truth. So even if the highest spiritual teachers were to say to me that's wrong, I say, well, you'd have to prove it to me otherwise because I have that information, you know. And I think this is the thing when we talk about our spirit guides, because, you know, we can get the similar type of proof, and once we get that proof, then we can move on to think about why are the spirit guides there, how we can connect better with them, and all those type of questions. But without that, I always think that it's vitally important that we have that sort of element to it, you know, that we have that always that element, because people are far too quick. Like sometimes, I don't know if you guys had this, but when I first started getting interested in things, I went to see lots of different psychics after all, like those first two ones I described to you. And you go to some people and they wouldn't tell you anything about yourself. They would just tell you predictions, none of which ever came true anyway. But I think, well, anybody can do that, can't you? Anybody could just reel off a load of things that you think that person might want to hear. But they have to, just working on a pure psychic level, this is without spirit or anything, they first have to give some evidence that they know about you, who you are, what you're like, and tell you a few things about your life and who you, and that type of thing. And I've noticed when people come to me for phone readings and things, sometimes some people will go, oh, I believe in all this. You don't need to tell me any evidence or proof. I just know it's true. So just tell me some predictions. And I say, no, I can't really do it that way. I have to prove that I'm linked with you first and tell you a few things about yourself. And although, you know, you might want me to spend most of my time talking about what's going to happen, I say, unless I know I'm linked with you, I could be coming from my imagination, because I don't know either, unless I know that I'm completely linked with you. Yeah. It's different when you've been doing readings for someone for a long time. I mean, you can kind of connect, but particularly with the first time reading with somebody, I think that's important. So these are the kind of the criteria that we have to use, don't we, when people are mediumistic. I mean, have you had any interesting experience with either proof of guides or an extraordinary proof?
How do you know the difference between a guide and just say a spirit coming through, or Because, for instance, one day I bought this new gas hob and it didn't seem to be working properly. It was a bottled gas hob, and I connected to that, and I thought, I don't know, this isn't much good. It's not working properly. And all of a sudden, a voice came into my head, loud, clear as a bell, and said, "Read the bloody book." So I got the book out, and sure enough, I could adjust it. You know, I was going to send the thing back. You know, now, was that a guide or what?
Well,
I don't know what it
might
was.
not be, but I often find most of,
yeah.
I think most of the stuff I get, actually, you know, I mean, a lot of people get a bit too carried away with guides. I've noticed that most of the stuff that I get when I'm giving any proofs and things, or if I get a message like you've just had like that, it's usually either my intuition, which is one thing, or it's somebody I know in the spirit world. You know, I sometimes will get those type of messages, like, "You're a bloody idiot." You know, that's my dad.
Oh, well, yeah.
Or blithering idiot. That's what he would have called me. You know, only joking. But I mean, if I'd hear it, you know, I think, just a minute, where did that come from? Actually, that's my father's energy that's there, and I can't prove to myself that that's just not my way my brain's working and my intuition's working. But there's kind of also another level of yourself that kind of knows that that's not my thought. You know, like,
yeah.
You know, read the bloody label. That's not necessarily you thinking that to yourself.
No.
That you felt that came from outside of you. So
Yes.
it could have been all sorts of different sources, but it was helpful. It was useful. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't something that was out of control. It was on a spiritual level, and it was you connecting. Well, we don't know if it was a guide or not. It could have been someone you love. The spirit side.
It could have been, yeah.
Millie,
it could have been. Yeah.
I have two. The first one is specifically, I remember when I was doing a reading, and as you know, I do out reports. And
Millie's, by the way, before you go on, Millie, if anybody wants a good astrological reading, Millie is brilliant for it.
And I didn't really.
I had one, yeah.
I didn't really realize I was doing this until a medium, the lady that runs the circle I go to, she told me. There was a gentleman that he wanted a reading done, and you know, I always ask, do you want to know everything? Because there's good and there's bad in the Vedic astrology. And he said, no, you know, I've been to many people, they don't tell me everything. I want you to tell me everything. Okay. So, and I remember when I was doing it, and I just, you know, I'm in the zone, and at the end of it, I read it and I thought, there was no way that I just wrote that. There was absolutely no way. So I knew that it was channeled right through me, my writing, because there was no way that I could write something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I've had this. I've written pieces of text on my books.
Yeah.
I've gone back and thought, did I write that? You know, and there's been whole novels written, you know, where people have been in trance and the guide has written the novel. Can't remember the name of it again now. What was it called? Forgotten the name of it now. I've got a lot to remember in this brain.
But diarize all your dreams.
Sorry?
This is why you need to diarize everything.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, but this was a famous novel. I can't remember the name of the novel, and it wasn't that brilliant, but it was still, you know, a pretty good novel that came through and the woman went into trance. Of course, trance writing is something that a lot of spiritualists have done over the time, you know, slate writing, for example, and sometimes writing that would appear on a slate when the circle came round. I've never tried that with my circles, but I've seen it happen, and I saw an alleged physical medium who I didn't, and it was just fake because we actually caught the person writing it. So, you know, so you got to be caught.
Guy, he was amazed. He was absolutely amazed, and he said it was dead on, and he's never had anybody tell him what I told him. I was worried that he would be offended from what I don't want to say, but from what I wrote. I thought that there was no way I would tell anybody that, what I had written for him. And he loved it.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, that comes up from somewhere else then, hasn't it?
It does.
Where did it come from? I mean, I think it can come from the universe. It can come from our intuition. It can come from the universe. I never know the difference. And it can come from our guides, and it can come from the people they know on the spirit side help them. I think it's a combination of all of it sometimes. The
And
fact is, the important thing is that that was a message that was very, very important to that person.
I think so.
Mm.
I do. I think so.
Yeah.
That same that medium. I remember when I saw her, and she told me I only know a couple of them. But she said I had 9 spirit guides, and the first one that she said I'm going to tell you about is a Tibetan monk. And I went, wait a minute, a Tibetan monk? And she said yes. And I said, well, isn't that funny? Every morning when I wake up, and this has been years, that's the first thing I put on Tibetan music. And I had no idea why.
Yeah. I'm sure that we get influenced like that. I think those type of our tastes and the things we do and the things we like are influenced by spirit influences like that, but also sometimes by our past life influences, I think, as well. And I think, like, I've got a Tibetan monk that works with me too, and this is the one that guide helps. I've have about 3 main guides really. But one is a Tibetan monk, or he's not quite Tibetan. There's something about him that's not quite Tibetan. I think he was in the Himalayas, and I've had proof of him too. And I used to do trance work, and he used to work with me for trance work and things. And I don't agree with everything he says personally either, you know, because I have a few gripes with Buddhism, in that I think Buddhism, this is a longer question, but I think Buddhism has missed the point on a lot of things, or oversimplified, I think, some things. Anyway, it's about the New Testament and Old Testament stuff, you know, like the New Testament's very different to what the Old Testament said. Anyway, I've lost my track. Yeah, so I found that it's kind of like it made a lot of sense to me when it was revealed to me that was the case, you know. And I've had proof of him through other mediums as well who don't know anything about you. The problem is, as you get known and then you write books, of course, people know too much about you, and it gets harder to get a proper message.
How do you find out who your spirit guides are?
Well, it's a long process, really. Partly, the most important part for me was circle originally when I first started to get to know it. But if you can't do a circle, then really deep.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Was that one? Oh, I think we might have a. I don't know what that was. The most important part is circle if you can do it. If not, it's quite interesting to do it in meditation. Now, I find, I mean, I don't know if any of the rest of you work like this, but I find sometimes when I just go into a deep meditation, there's meditation and meditation. There's like the meditation you will do that is like the yogic meditation, which might involve focus and concentration and so forth. But I will go after that into what I would call different to meditation. I'd call it attunement with spirit, which is kind of different to meditation, in which I just go into kind of like almost like a free flow of thought, where I'm just there. It's less concentrated. But I'm still very alert, because I usually use some technique in meditation beforehand, because I use various pranayamas and things like that for my own personal meditation. So I've got a good, well concentrated, set mind. So I'm not going off in some dreamy fantasy. So I'm very awake, very aware, but also very fluid at the same time. So I'm both focused and unfocused at the same time. And I find it's like then, it's hard to explain. It's then as if I can just feel the thoughts interlaying with my own. It's like they pop into my head. And I know then that the spirit people are with me. And then what you need to do is ask them a question. You know, so ask a question. There might be something about your life or something. You're not necessarily always asking for proof. But I find the spirit world can't give you an answer if you don't ask the question. And there might be something about they've got to be given permission to give you the answer, or you've got to build the communication between the two of you. But if I pose a question about my life, what should I do about so-and-so? And then I go quiet and wait, the voice will come, as it were, or the impression will come, or a picture will come, or whatever way you're kind of orientated as a person. Because some people are more auditory, some people are more tactile, and so. But the picture or the answer will come to you. So to connect with your spirit guide, work like that to begin with, and accept it could be your own intuition. It could just be your own intuition, or as you move along, you start to get a different feeling, because you'll notice that, you know, some of the answers will have a certain energy with it, atmosphere, vibration. Other questions might have a different atmosphere, vibration, and you feel that they're coming from different personalities. And at the same time, I know that's not my own personality, not splitting like a schizophrenic, but how do they call it? Freud used to call it disassociation or something like that. It's not that. It's not me finding three parts of my own personality and seeing, but still question it, you know, and see and experiment, because it's all you anyway. So there's nothing to be afraid of. Or it's something that's coming from the outside, because I feel, I mean, you could even say, do we have any of our own thoughts anyway? You know, I mean, do we own a thought at all? Where do they come from? We are just the focus of a whole flow of thoughts that seems to create this thing that we call the I. You know, that's another place to meditate. But with the spirit people, I quite often find, keeping it on a simpler level here, really, that sometimes you can just sit and be and ask, go quiet, the answer comes. It may have come from my intuition, or it may have come from the spirit guides. And I think the longer you go on for it, I mean, eventually it falls, you get to know it yourself anyway, you know?
Do you meditate in complete silence, or do you have say music in the background, you know, gentle music?
Well, I always meditate in complete silence.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. So, you know, but you can't stop the distractions from the world being around. There's might be traffic in the background, things like that. So I always bring that into my meditation. So if there's noise, like traffic sounds, I'll first of all put my full attention onto that traffic sound. And I put my full attention onto a ticking clock, or I put my full attention onto a disturbing roadworks in the background. And I allow that in and let it be as it is. And then I can move away from that, and it's there. I can go back to it or away from it, back to it or away from it. Because we train the attention not to be distracted by allowing it to be. And it's the same if you're uncomfortable, you know, if you go and join meditation groups and you're sat in cross-legged position for half an hour or more, and your legs are going numb and it's painful. The thing to do is put your full attention on it and then move back away again, so that you can handle this. And this is what people do when these yogis do these things where they put great austerities upon themselves. They're using that same idea. They put their attention on the pain and move their attention back away from the pain. So that's something that I think is very important in meditation. But I've gone off target. I've gone off topic. Yeah. As usual.
Wow.
So have any of you ever felt a connection with your spirit guides or things like that?
Yes. Yeah, I think I have in meditation. Yeah.
How about you, Graham? Have you done that in
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Lost you.
Fine. So
We lost your voice for a minute there, I think.
Oh, sorry. I'm very analytical, so I always question everything. So I think I may have done, but then I always question whether it's my imagination. Or,
Yeah.
What I was interested in is with the spirit guides, do they tend to be past relatives, or are they completely independent? Like for me, I sense like past relatives around me, like my nan and so on. And they seem, and I can pick them up, but I'm not sure I could pick up my spirit guide.
Yeah, I find, well, talking from a personal point of view, I find that 90% of my communications tend to be from people I know in the spirit side. You know, I feel them come round me, and I probably meeting friends on the spirit side more than I meet friends in real life sometimes.
Am I different then? Because I have archangels.
Uh-huh. But then I also get the spirit guides that help me, but that tends to be when I'm working. So for example, if if I'm doing trance work, I have a Tibetan guide that comes and helps with that. If I'm doing platform work, right, where I'm demonstrating mediumship, there's two guides that work with me with that. One is my American Indian guide, which is another one that I found quite a big ask to take on, this idea that American Indian helps you.
Yeah.
And he would help me with the message. And sometimes I can feel whole hosts of people around organizing people. If I've got a big event and there's a big audience, like a theater and things, I can feel a whole crowd of people behind me kind of making sure that the right person gets through for the next message and so forth, and helps get the guidance. And then I've got another one, which this was the hardest one I ever found to connect with, which was a clown, like an Italian clown that comes and jumps in. And I've had so much proof of him, because he would come in just to make sure that everybody is keeping the atmosphere light and humorous. You know, I mean, I've got a sense of humor, but he brings in stuff, messages and things that the audience find hilarious. He always, he has this thing about finding stories about false teeth, right? So if I know if I start having to give people messages about false teeth, you know, I know that he's at work. And I have had absolutely every possible crazy story you could think about associated with false teeth. You know, your grandmother used to use her false teeth to cut the side of the pastry. You know, she did. Or there was one story where I said, you know, I said to one woman, and this is another proof of a spirit guide, because I knew he always brings the false teeth stories, and I could feel him with me. I got to give this crazy false teeth story. And I had to say to the woman, you went to his funeral, and in your bag, you had his false teeth, because they couldn't get him in his mouth in time for the burial. And she had said, yes, that was the case. I went to the undertakers. I missed them just in time. I was supposed to get him the false teeth, so he was buried without his false teeth. And I thought, wow, that for me was absolute proof of that spirit guide, you see. And then, of course, there's others, like Jonathan's talked about, higher angels and things like that. I think sometimes you'd feel those as well around me. I've had people that I cannot describe in human form, who are these kind of like beings of pure light, who just come and are, you know, there and give you teachings. And I have proof of that too.
Most of the archangels have been humans or incarnated in other worlds before. Like Patron is Enoch. Oriel was an artist.
Yeah. I think that this is where we start to go on to the next phrase, which is a bit harder to prove, in that there are probably higher beings there that help us, who have never incarnated and never been part of this life with us here, you know, never been part of this, never born. Some have born and been and live in the spirit world. And I think all of us, we come into this world and we go back into the spirit. We're incarnated again and we go back into the spirit over many, many lifetimes, until eventually we become gods. And surely that realm we're talking about is the realm of the gods, isn't it? You know, I mean, aren't we all will eventually become gods ourselves. You know, we will become godlike beings. We will have the power to be of higher consciousness that we would take into the next realm, and not need to reincarnate again.
Isn't that what your monad is?
Which one?
The monad.
Yeah, that could be.
I am.
Yeah, and also, you know, I mean, all the traditions have different ways of describing it, you know, but basically all of them come down to that there's some kind of higher being, isn't there? A higher group of beings.
God that it projects us into incarnation.
Yeah.
In that we grow and ascend.
Yeah, well, we do. And, you know, we all evolve spiritually, you know. I mean, at some point, you know, I must have started off as a different being to me. There's a lot of difference between my consciousness and the consciousness of an ant, because I've often thought about this. You know, an ant is still a being. An ant is living in its world, but my consciousness is definitely different to that ant. Even though at heart we're all one, even me and the ant are all one with the universal consciousness, with the Godhead, as it were. There's more quantity to my consciousness than the ant consciousness. So therefore, our consciousness has quantity. I've always thought that's quite an interesting concept. And so there's our consciousness must have some form of form, you know. And that, however we describe it in a mythical language or whichever religious language you use, that I think is the basic idea, that we become bigger consciously, and eventually we become fully awake beings, awake, aware of the great universal consciousness that some call God, or you could call the infinite, or you could call the absolute, you know, or you could call it the absolute love of existence, because that's probably the easiest way to describe it, is the force of love, because it seems to have that in light and so forth. And I think all the spirit guides are there really to take us up the ladder, to take us up Jacob's ladder, as it were, isn't it, towards
In order to receive, you've got to give, though.
absolutely. And that's part of the lessons that we learn. But I think the spirit guides there, I think they're in everybody's life. They say we all have a life guide that sees us into this world and out of this world, and I'm sure we're helped on all the difficult spiritual entry and ending of this world. And I think when one becomes a medium, then guides become particularly important. Or if you start off on a very spiritual path where you're helping others with your spiritual work, then I think the spirit will recognize that there's a light there, that you're a light, that you're there helping others, and they will come and they will try to help you. I think it's natural that if somebody starts to awaken and starts to think beyond the mundane world and starts to think in different ways, not necessarily always being a medium or a psychic, but you know, even somebody that might be a surgeon or something like that, something where you're doing something that has great and a great opportunity to relieve suffering, I think you're helped then. I think you're helped with your energy, you're helped to move forward, you're helped with your inner confidence and things like that from the other side. That's my thought. But, you know, how can we prove it? We can just do this. We learn this through experience. So that's some of my thoughts. So, you know, people talk about making categories and things with it all, you know, like we talk about angels, archangels and that. In spiritualism, they talk about the difference between gatekeepers, which are the ones that help you in and out of life, guides, which are the ones that help you with spiritual work, helpers, which are also those that come and help you with your healing work or so forth, and then angels and archangels and things and so forth. So the tendency is to want to put everything into categories, but basically there's a whole load of people over there on the spirit side that they're human and beyond human. You know, they might even exist in other dimensions and other worlds. They might be part of another universe. They might never have even incarnated into the material plane. They might be conscious beings from some type of world that's inconceivable to us. And if it's all out there, and I've often thought, well, you know, I remember saying to my guide, I said to my guide on a very, very powerful experience I was having once, I said, how can you prove you're real? And he turned to me in that case and said, well, in many ways, ultimately, I can't. But as long as what I'm telling you rings true, then surely that's all you need. Whether I'm real or not, as long as the truth is truth. That's what something to that effect. It was said internally to me. And it meant a lot to me because I thought, yes, it doesn't matter as long as I know that what I'm saying is true and can help and be of benefit to me and to the world, you know. It's the message that matters, not the messenger. And I think a lot of people get a little bit too carried away if you get involved in this. I don't know how deeply you all are involved in things, but I've often come across in spiritualism, for example, where people come and they go on about the most grandiose spirit guides, and they go on and on about the most detailed. You know, I mean, one said, you know, he had a spirit guide here from Atlantis and things, and I thought, well, there's no way I can prove that one way or the other. You know, what can you say? You know, but I thought, well, but this person couldn't even give the basic, simple spirit message from somebody in the spirit, a grandmother link or something. You know, so I thought, well, you know, until you can do the mediumship, I can't believe that you've got it, that you're getting that right. And that often is the case, unfortunately. I found a lot within the spiritual, you know, not just spiritualism. I say spiritualism because it's one of the main areas, but the psychic fairs and the rest of it. When you meet the groups of mediums in person, you soon start to think, well, you know, about 1 in 1,000 here seems to be the real deal, and others tend to have got a bit carried away. But each of us, obviously, we want to get on with our path. We want to learn. We want to know what it is, and hopefully, some of those ideas there about testing it and questioning it is important. You haven't said anything, Susie. Have you had any questions at all?
Okay, you're psychic. You know I had a question. So here's what I was thinking about. You know, at times I have thoughts come in, for example, and I don't really try to identify where they're coming from. For example, yesterday, I can't even remember what it was, but I encountered something, and my late husband had this great sense of humor, and I thought, oh, I can feel him laughing with me about this. He would think this would, you know, he thinks, he would not would, he thinks this is funny. But I've heard you talk about, I think it's you talk about, for example, Ouija boards, and that when you use a Ouija board, what you're sometimes doing is inviting in these lower level spirits, you know, these trickster type, and they're not very smart necessarily, and they're not out for your, for your benefit. So my question is it through this testing? I mean, how do you know that what you're connecting with is not one of those lower level spirits?
That's a good question, actually. And I think what I think about this, when you do meditation, you're going into a state, really, and if you do, you're going into a state that is, how can I say, positive, isn't it? It's not, you're not going into a meditation drunk or angry or in any negative sort of mindset. You're going into a state of meditation in which you're trying to connect to the light, as it were, in the simplest sense. You know, you're trying to find the light within you. And I think as long as you're working in your life with the light, as it were, with good attitude towards people in the world, as long as you're doing things with sincerity and love, you know, you are 100% protected, because darkness cannot penetrate light. Light can penetrate darkness, but darkness cannot penetrate light. So if you're working with that sort of spirit, that sort of energy, the negative things can't hurt you. And in fact, you shouldn't let that even begin to create fear in yourself.
Good, how are you?
I disagree with you.
Yeah, good, thank you.
Fine with spirit, when you kind of feeling it.
So we've got some interference here, I think. Someone might.
Okay.
So yeah, so the essence of it is if we're working on, so, and the other thing, Susie, I think one of the most protective things that we can have is the power of love, actually, particularly on a spiritual level, because the power of love is something that is tremendously, tremendously powerful. And I've been working as a medium for years, all my life, nearly, most of my life. And, you know, early 20s I started. And I've been into some pretty scary places, you know. I've been into places where I've seen possessed people. I've been into places where we've had stuff thrown around with poltergeists. I've been into places that are genuinely meant to be haunted. I've been into asylums with schizophrenics and all sorts of things where there's lots of negative energy, and it never has affected me, because I know that none of that can harm me. I know that I am protected by the light. And I know also that your spirit guides are there to protect. And I suppose if anything goes against your reason, throw it out, you know, try to be sensible and reasonable about the way we go about these things. Do things with a spirit of truth and love and energy. And I don't think you'll ever go wrong. I mean, there's certain things you can also do, which we can go on to talk about another time, how to protect yourself. You know, there's certain things we can do. But I think basically, as long as your spirit is right, as long as you're walking the path of truth, nothing will harm you. You know? So that's my basics on it, Susie. But I expect there's a lot more one could say about that. You could talk for hours on those type of things, of course. So we're going to have to come into an end soon. I'll have to finish on time tonight, because I've got a Chinese meal ordered,
Oh,
and it'll be coming any minute.
can't miss that.
So we're finished there, but I have a look on the Patreon pages too, because I'm asking people to put some questions up about any question. I'm working on my predictions for next year. So that's always quite an important one for me to work on. If you've got any questions about, not now, but if you want to put it on the Patreon pages, I've got a little post there. If you've got any questions they might have about the future for the world. And anybody got any particular thoughts that you'd like us to do for next week?
Oh, I don't know. How about angels?
Angel, well, we've kind of been onto that today.
Yeah, we have, haven't we? I don't know, really.
I can come up with something myself, but just if there's
Craig,
anything you want to.
Do you know much about shamanic stuff? Because I don't know anything about that at all, or even what it is.
Shamanism.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
I don't know a vast amount about it. I know, a bit about it. I mean, you're talking about things like animalism and animal guides and all those type of things that people think about. I don't think I'd be able to give you a good enough insight into that, because I've not done enough work with that field. We could try something like that. I could think around that if you like. I mean, I've looked into possibly we could have a think about that. I'll put a note for that.
And medicine wheels, I don't even know what they are either. But
yeah, it's not really my field. It's quite an interesting one though. It's an interesting one. All right, I'll have a think.
Don't know anything about it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's probably a bit out of my league, that one. It would have been quite a good guest speaker to have on, wouldn't it? We could always arrange that sometime. I could bring in some guest speakers, because I do know people. Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll have a think. Anyway, I'm going to finish there now. So I hope that was helpful to people, useful.
Thanks, Ray.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And if any of you do have any particular topics you'd like me to raise ever for these type of things, and you think about it later, just stick a post on, drop me a line on the Patreon pages, and private message Patreon, you're welcome to, and I'll consider those as well as topics. Okay, thank you all.
Okay, thank you very much.
See you next time. Same time, same channel. This time every Monday at the moment. Okie doke. Bye for now, folks.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye then.
Bye. Bye.